On this video, I would like to continue what I started a long time ago or some time ago, and that is working through where I left off in the book of Job, chapter 31, at verse 13. We're looking at the Hebrew, reading it phrase by phrase, doing a grammatical analysis, followed by a brief commentary. We have worked our way up to this place. We've also doing the same thing. We've also done the same in chapter 38 to the end of the book. So now we're at verse 13. And as we look at this chapter, Job is making an oath of his innocence. And the whole chapter is establishing his innocence as he's reasoning. He had not sinned with his eyes. He had been humble, not guilty of doing harm to others. And now we come to how he was considerate to those that were under him. He was a considerate and kind master. So we pick it up at verse 13. Im emas mishpat avdi va'amati. If I despised the cause or the justice due, my manservant and my female servant. In other words, if I have done that, then I would be very guilty, he's saying. Notice here we have emas, which is the cow imperfect, first common singular from as, to despise. And then beriva imadi, when they contended with me, or in their contending with me. And the thought seems to be, as they contended with me, I was always treating them justly, and I did not oppress them at all. And so in verses 14 and 15, he continues, Uma aseh ki yakum el. What then had I done wrong to those in my household, the manservant and the maidservant? Then what shall I do when God rises up against me? Aseh is from asa. It's the cow imperfect, first common singular from asa, to do. And then yakum is the cow imperfect, third masculine singular from kum, middle weak verb. What shall I do when God rises up against me? Vechi yifkod ma ashivenu. And when he remembers or is reminded of what I've done, then what shall I return to him? And an answer. Here we have yifkod. It's the cow imperfect, third masculine singular from pakad, to remember. And then ashivenu. What shall I answer or return to him in answering him? And then the thought seems to be, I've treated my servants in a just way in my house. If I hadn't, then he said, I could not stand before God when he called me to an account. And then he continues, Halo vaveten oseni asahu. Did not literally in the womb. The one who made me make him. And he's asking the question, my maidservant, my manservant, we were all made by God. And so how could I mistreat him or anyone for that matter? Notice here, oseni is from asa, to make. It's the cow participle, masculine singular from asa. The hay has dropped out, and the e here, following the hinge in ein ni, is a first person singular pronominal suffix. And did not one fashion us in the womb? Vayachunenu berechem echad. Did not one echad, God, fashion us or make us in the womb? In other words, he's the creator of all humanity, of all of us. And so for me to mistreat anyone would be to mistreat God's creation, is his argument here. Via hunenu is from hun, to fashion, and we have the cow imperfect, third masculine singular, and then with the pronominal suffix, first common plural in the new. So did not one fashion us in the womb? Here again, Scripture is teaching that Job is saying that we were all created by God, and therefore we should have brotherly love for one another, for each other. Both, all people, are fashioned by God in the womb, and therefore to mistreat anyone is contrary to the Creator. And then he goes on in verse 16. Im emna mehefetz dalim. If I withheld from the poor, literally from the desire of the poor. Notice emna is from mana. It's the cow perfect, first common singular from mana. So if I withheld from the desire of the poor, a need that he had, or the ene almana achaleh, or the eyes of a widow, if I cause to fail, from kala, if I failed the eyes of a widow. Again, kala is the root here, and I'm understanding this as a PL stem, first common singular from kala. So if I have failed or caused to fail the eyes of a widow, then God needs to judge me. It is interesting here, the widow, anticipating relief, would weep if he refused to listen to her. He did not cause her to weep or cause the eyes of the widow to fail by hoping for something that didn't happen. And so the eyes end up in sorrow. And then in verse 17, excuse me, the ohal piti levadi, or if I have eaten my morsel alone by myself. So the ohel is from achal, to eat, the cow imperfect, first common singular from achal. So if I ate my morsel by myself, velo achal yatom mimenu, and the fatherless have not eaten from it. In other words, if I've selfishly just fed myself and didn't take care of the widow, achal is the cow, perfect third masculine singular from achal. And the thought here is in the ancient Middle East or Near East, you had of the rights of a widow or an orphan. They were to be treated right and fairly. So Job always took care of them. And this is what he is claiming. And then in verse 18, he continues, Ki min neurai gedelani ha'av. So from my youth, he grew up with me as a father. Gedelah is the cow perfect third masculine singular from Gadal, followed by the pronominal suffix first person singular. So he grew up with me from my youth as a father, and I have been his guide, umibeten imi anhena, and from my mother's womb I have been her guide. Notice here, nacha means to guide. A hiphil imperfect first common singular from nacha with the pronominal suffix third feminine singular. And the thought here seems to be that Job did not neglect the widow or the stranger or anyone. That seems, and he goes on to drive that home as he moves on. My mind goes to the New Testament, to Matthew 25, where Jesus said, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. And I'm thinking of James. Pure religion is to take care of the fatherless and the widows. So the New Testament is affirming the same in the Sermon on the Mount and in the book of James. So in 19, im ere oved bibli levush. Or if I have seen or if I saw the wanderer, the one wandering with lack of clothing. Ere is from ra'ah, it's the cow imperfect first common singular from ra'ah, to see. And oved is a cow participle masculine singular from avad, the one wandering. And I think here, again, our mind goes back, I was a stranger, Jesus said, and you took me in Matthew 25. And then, or the needy, ve'ein kesut le'evyon, or that there was no covering for the needy. In other words, I didn't have clothing, and you took care of me. So Job had clothed the needy out of his own means. This seems to be what he is saying here, as he's again showing his innocency before his friends and before God. And so we move on to the next verse, verse 20. Imlo verachuni halatsav. If his loins have not blessed me, if his loins have not brought a blessing to me because of the way I treated him in a wonderful way. Berachuni is the PL, perfect, third common plural from barak, followed by the pronominal suffix first person singular. Or, if he were not warm, umegaz mevasai yet chamam. If he were not warmed with the fleece, or with the fleece of my sheep, if he were not warm. Yet hamam is a hit pa'al, imperfect, third masculine singular from hamam, to be warm. So if he were not warmed, then I would be guilty, but that was not the case. He was warmed, he was taken care of, that is, the one that had need. And then verse 21 reads, Im hanifoti al yatom yadai. If I have lifted up my hand against the fatherless or the orphan, again, he is claiming that he had treated the orphan well, enough to lift up the cow perfect first common singular. So if I have lifted up my hand against the fatherless, ki ere vasha'ar ezrati, because I saw in the gate my help. Ere is just your cow imperfect first common singular from ra'ah. And the thought here seems to be the judge might stand by the wicked and give his decision against the innocent orphan. If this had been so with Job, he calls for God's judgment. That is, if I had done that, or if I had in any way mistreated the orphan at the gate where judgment was carried on, because I had power and could do that, then let my shoulder fall from the shoulder blade. Notice verse 22. Ketefi mishechma tipo. Let fall my shoulder from the shoulder blade. Tipo is the cow imperfect third feminine singular from nafal. So let my shoulder, let it fall from the shoulder blade. The ezro'i mikana tishaver, and let my arm ezro'i be broken from the bone. Mikana tishaver, from the bone let it be broken. Tishaver is the Jasiv Nifal, third feminine singular from shavar, to break. Notice the a vowel pattern, the hirik followed by the commas, and the doubling of the sheen. The noon of the nifal having, by progressive assimilation, gone into the sheen. And so what he's saying here again in 22, if I've done anything, if he has done any of these things, he asks that his arm be broken. And it seems that in this text he's referring back to Eliphaz's charge in chapter 22, verse 9. And so we continue then in verse 23. Ki fachat Eli aid el, for calamity from God was a terror to me. For literally, a terror unto me was calamity from God. And because of his majesty, mis eto lo uchal, by reason of his majesty, I was not able to do anything. Again, he is talking about his respect for God's majesty. Uchal is your cow imperfect, first common singular from Yachal. I was not able to do anything because of his majesty. Job's fear of God prevented him from sinning. If God's wrath falls upon a person, he cannot endure. That seems to be the thought here. So then we move on to the next verse, verse 24 to 25. If I had made gold my hope, im samti za'av kishli. If I had made gold my hope. Now he's going to talk about not putting his confidence in gold and money. Samti is the cow perfect first common singular from sim. So if I have made gold my hope, velahetef amarti mivtachi, and to the fine gold, had I said to the fine gold, you understood are my confidence. If I had said to the fine gold, my confidence, you are understood. Again, here, amarti is just your cow perfect, first common singular from amar, and miftachi means confidence, with the pronominal suffix first person singular. So, what he's saying here in these verses, and it continues. Let me read verse 25. It continues. Im esmach ki rab chelo. If I rejoice because great was my wealth. Esmach is from samach, to rejoice. It's the cow imperfect first common singular. So if I rejoice because my wealth was great, V'chi kabir matza'a yadai, and because my hand had found, had gotten much. In other words, because much my hand had gotten. In other words, much gold and much riches. The thought here is Job asserts his freedom from the trust of money. A New Testament reference here would be 1 Timothy 6:17, where Paul warns against trusting money. Earlier in the chapter, he had spoken of his duty toward himself and his neighbor. Now he speaks of his duty towards God. Covetousness is equated with covert idolatry, for it is loving a created thing more than the Creator. So in verses 26 to 27, he discusses overt idolatry. Notice in verse 26 then, it reads, Imereh ur ki yachel. Or if I saw the sun or the light the sun, when it shone forth. Yachel is from halal, to shine forth. It's the Hifil imperfect third masculine singular from halal. And eret is your first person singular, kal imperfect from ra'ah. So if I saw the light, and the light here I think referring to the sun, uh, and uh, when it shone, in other words, the sun was worshipped in ancient Babylonian religion and Egyptian religion. So if I saw the sun and I really worshipped it, understood here, or the moon, the Yareah, Yakar Holeg, or the moon in brightness walking. Holeg is the cow participle masculine singular from halak. So in other words, if I if I secretly worship or overtly worship the sun or the moon, and these were worshipped over and over in the ancient Near East. And what he's really saying is, I did not do that. Then I should be judged. Because he says in verse 28, Im hu avon peli li. Then indeed this would be iniquity of punishable by the judges. Peli li would be the judges, and iniquity of the judges. In other words, to be punished by the judges. Ki hihashti la'el mima'al. For then I would have lied, or I should have lied to God above. Kihashti is your PL perfect first common singular from kahash. I would have lied to God above. The thought here seems to be, by the way, uh, let me go back to verse 27. If my heart had been secretly enticed, vayeft baseter libi, if enticed in secret my heart, and my hand or my mouth kiss my hand, vatishak yadi lafi. Uh, Tishak is from nashak, to kiss, and so if my mouth, if to my mouth it kissed my hand, and here we have the cow imperfect third feminine singular from nashak, to kiss, a pay noon verb where the noon has gone into the sheen. So as we summarize these chapters, the thought seems to be, as heavenly bodies were one of the earliest forms of idolatry, the sun, the moon, the stars, as the brightest objects in the sky, they were worshipped from high places, from rooftops. We see this in Ezekiel 8:16, or Deuteronomy 4:19, or 2 Kings 23, verses 5 and 11. And if they were worshipped as the visible representative of the invisible God, then I would be at fault. This worship was prevalent in Mesopotamia. The names of the first days of the week, Sunday and Moon Day or Monday, still reflect this ancient practice. Job never worshiped these heavenly bodies. That's what he's saying. Or kissed my hand. One way of worshiping is to kiss the hand and then throw the kiss toward the object being worshipped. Similar in 1 Kings 19 18, and Hosea 13, verse 2. And so in verse 28, he's saying this would actually have been an iniquity punished by the judges, and that I should have lied to God above. The Mosaic Law commanded that idolatry receive a judicial punishment, as it constituted treason against God, their supreme king. We see this in Deuteronomy 13, 6 to 9, and also in 17 of Deuteronomy 2 to 7, and in Ezekiel 8, 14 to 18. So this would be a horrible sin receiving punishment. And so he is saying, I did not commit this serious offense. And so what he's saying is, I have been free from any form of idolatry whatsoever. And then in 29, he continues to talk about how he related to those around him, to his fellow human beings. Notice, if I rejoice, im esmach befid me shan I. If I rejoice at the destruction of the one who hated me. Esmach is from samach, to rejoice, the cow imperfect first person singular. So if I rejoice at the destruction of the one who hated me, meshan e, sana, to hate, is a pl participle, masculine singular, with that mem prefix in the Shabbat Pathak vowel pattern, followed by the e, the pronominal suffix first person singular. So if I rejoice at the destruction of the one who hated me, vahit orarti ki matsaho ra, or I exalted when evil found him. In other words, if I exalted when my fellow human being was judged. Hit orarti, a hit polal form, first common singular from arar. So if I exalted or became happy when evil found him, mitzao from matzah, the cow perfect third masculine singular, followed by the pronominal suffix in the o. So what we're seeing here is Job had not rejoiced at a calamity over his enemy. And that is something, again, that we find throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. Proverbs 17, verse 5, 24, Proverbs 17 to 18, and Psalm 7, 4 to 5. We also find it in the Sermon on the Mount, the teaching of Jesus, how we're to love our enemies as ourselves. And so he's talking about how he did not rejoice at the calamity that would come to his enemy. So in verse 30, the text then continues, Velo natati lachato chiki. I did not suffer my mouth to sin, or did not give my mouth to sin. Natati is from Natan. It's the cow perfect first common singular. So I did not give to sin. Lachato is the cow infinitive construct from chata, to sin. My palate. In other words, I did not give my palate to sin. And I guess we could render this my mouth to sin by asking lish'ol be'ala nafshi, by asking for a curse, or asking with a curse his life, the life of my enemy, I think he's saying. Lish'ol is your cow infinitive construct from sha'al. And so as we look at this verse, not only has he refused to do anything and wish something bad about his enemy, but he refused to curse anyone with his mouth. And again, Leviticus 19:18, Deuteronomy 23, verse 5, and in the New Testament, bless those that curse you, Matthew 5:43 to 44, loving one's enemies. And then in 31, the text continues, Im lo amaru mete aholi. If men of my tent did not say, amru is the cow perfect third common plural from amar. So if the men of my tent did not say, mi yitain mibesaro lo nisba, who can find one that has not been satisfied with his meat? So who will give from his meat that has not been satisfied? I think the idea is he's taken care of everyone. Yatain is the cow imperfect third masculine singular from Natan, pay noon verb, where the noon has assimilated into the tab. Yintain becoming yitain. So who can find one that has not been satisfied from his meat? Nisba is the nifal perfect third masculine singular, has not been satisfied from sabah. And here his servants have no cause to complain about Job's treatment of them, seems to be the thought. In other words, he's saying, I've treated everybody well. In all of my household, no one can claim that I did not provide for them or feed them, seems to be the thought. So he's claiming all the way through here his wonderful treatment of others, of everybody. And then he continues, the next verse, verse 32. Bechutz lo yalin ger. On the outside, the stranger did not lodge. Yalin is the cow perfect third masculine singular, from loon to lard to lodge. So on the outside, a stranger did not lodge. Delatai la orach eftach. My doors I open to the roadside. Notice eftach is from patach, to open, the cow imperfect first common singular. And so the thought is, any traveler, stranger, coming to Job's doorstep, he turned no one away. He welcomed the stranger. And again, I'm reminded of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. I was a stranger and you took me in. And then in verse 33, Im kisiti adam pesha'ai. If I had covered as Adam, as man, if I had covered, as men tend to do, my transgressions. Kisiti is your PL uh, perfect first common singular from kasa. So if I had covered, as men are prone to do, my transgression, lit mon bechubi avoni, to hide in my bosom my iniquity. Uh, Litmon from taman, to hide, is the cow infinitive construct, to hide. And so he returns again to the fact that he's done everything openly. Uh, there are no sins that he has committed. He has not hidden anything. And by the way, Adam hid from God. So 33 is sort of interesting. If I have hid as Adam my transgression, it could mean mankind here, but Adam hid from God. He is the representative of fallen man's natural desire to conceal his action. Job said, I did not try to hide any sins from God, uh, like what Adam had done. So again, Job is claiming, I've been upright in everything that I have done. So verse 34, it continues, Ki arotz hamon rabbah, because had I hidden, because I feared the great multitude. Arotz is the cow imperfect first common singular from aratz. I feared the great multitude, and uh, uvuz mishpachot yechiteni, and the most despised among families terrified me. Uh, in other words, had I really, in verse 34, been a hypocrite, I had not been a hypocrite. Had everything he had done, he did openly. He had no hidden sins, as his friends had affirmed. And so, if I had feared the great multitude because of what they had thought, but I wasn't. And even among those contemptible families, they did not terrify me. So that I kept silent. I didn't keep silent. I was open to help the poor and plead the needy. Edom is from damam, the cow perfect first common singular. Uh, and had I done that, it would have been wrong. Kept silent and went not out of the door. Lo ate say from yatsa, the cow imperfect first common singular. From vatsa, historically a peva verb. And now we have compensatory lengthening with the tseri under the olive. So what he's saying in verse 34, Job was not a hypocrite. He really helped those in need. He went out of his way to reach out to them and to go out to where they were and help them. And then he continues in verse 35. He wants to be heard by God. Mi yitain li, shomea li. He said, oh, that he would give to me one who hears me. Yaten is from Natan. It's the cow imperfect, third masculine singular from Natan. Oh, that he would give to me. Shomea is the cow participle masculine singular, the one who hears me. Hain tavi shaddai ya aneni. That is, here is my signature, what I'm now driving home. Let the Almighty answer me. Ya'aneni is the jussive, the cow imperfect third masculine singular from ana, elamed hey verb. So let the Almighty, let Him answer me. He's claiming again his innocence before God. Besefer katuv ish rivi. And the indictment written, that I had the indictment which my adversary has written, or the indictment, my indictment, which the man literally of my adversary has written. The book has written, or the indictment the man of my adversary has written. In other words, what he's saying here is he wants someone to hear his argument and what he is saying. And here, katab is just your cow perfect third masculine singular from katab. And the thought of verse 35, he returns to his wish that he had expressed in chapter 13:22 and 19:23. He is ready to sign the above statements indicating their truthfulness. He asks God to either acquit him or make a decision in light of what he has claimed. So in verse 36, Im lo al shikmi esa enu. Surely I would carry it upon, is it not literally upon my shoulder that I would carry it? Esa enu is from nasa, a pay noon verb where the noon has assimilated into the scene, followed then by the pronominal suffix in the u here, third masculine singular. So surely I would carry it, egdenu, I would bind atarobli as a crown to me. I would bind it, from, it looks like a god. That gimel is so small sometimes it's hard to read. I would bind it as a crown to me. Here, I would carry it on my shoulder and I would bind it. The thought seems to be so sure that God's verdict on Job would be positive. He says he would be glad to wear God's verdict around as a king does his crown. Sort of an interesting way that he is concluding his argument here. So in verse 37, Mispar se adai agidenu, I would declare unto him the number of my steps. Agidenu is from Nagad. It's the Hiphil imperfect first common singular from Nagad. On Gidenu, I would declare to him. N is a hinge, and who, the hay went back into the noon by reverse assimilation, and we end up with I would declare to him I would declare the number of my steps to him as a prince. Kemi nagi akaravenu. As a prince, I would go near unto him, go near unto God. And this is from Karab, the cow imperfect first common singular, from Karab to come near, followed by the pronominal suffix in the en who becoming en nu. And the thought here seems to be a clear conscience would give him dignity and the ability to stand freely before God because he has that. So Job has such a confidence in his innocency that he would stand before God as a proud prince, unlike what the friends are accusing him of. So in verse 38, it continues, Im alai admati tizak. If my land would cry out against me, tizak is from sa'ak to cry, cow imperfect, third feminine singular from sa'ak. So admati, if my land would cry out against me, and beyachad telameha yif kayun, and the furrows weep together, or together, its furrows would weep. Here we have baka, to weep, the cow imperfect, third masculine, or third masculine plural from baka. So if its furrows would weep against me. And again, the thought seems to be the complaints of the wrong landowners are transferred to the lands themselves now. Uh, Job has not unjustly acquired land, or the land would cry out against him. Again, he's concluding with further statement of his innocency. And he's arguing that if I had been guilty of anything, acquiring land that I shouldn't have, it would cry out against me. And then verse 39, Im koha achalti bali chasiv. If its fruit I had eaten without money. Achalti is from achal, the cow perfect, first common singular. So if I had eaten its fruit without money, v'nefesh be'alecha hipachti, or have caused its tillers to be disappointed. In other words, the thought here in 39 seems to be if Job had stolen another's fruit, or if he had brought anything to landowners in a wrong way by seizing their land, then Job should be judged. If that's the case, but again, he's showing his guilt, that he's innocent. In other words, and if he's guilty, if I have called its tillers, the soul of its tillers, if I have caused it to be disappointed, then let thistles grow instead of wheat for me. Tachat chita yetze ho'ah. In other words, instead, let thistles grow instead of wheat, or instead of wheat, let thistles come forth. Yetze is the cow imperfect, third masculine singular from yatsah, and let weeds instead of barley. Betachat she'orah va-sha, or va-sha. Then the words of Job are ended. Tamu devrei Job. The words of Job are now ended. And tamam, to end, the cow perfect, third masculine, or third common plural. So the thought here seems to be the he's talking about thistles and weeds. The word for thistles would be like brambles or thorns, and weeds here would be noxious weeds that are very hard to destroy. They keep coming back, robbing the crops of the nourishment they need. And what seems to be happening here, this is part of a curse Job would put on his land if he had gained anybody else's land unjustly. Since his land had produced bountifully, he used this as further proof of his innocence. And so the words of Job are now ended. This ends the controversy between Job and his three friends. He speaks again in the book, but not to them. Again, he has returned to the claim of his innocency. And so, as we finish this great chapter, we will now begin in the next video, wrapping up the book of Job with the words of Elihu. Let me just stop here and say this chapter is an amazing chapter. It's looking at what a righteous man looks like. And I appreciate just reading this chapter and thinking about it in relationship to the New Testament in conclusion. He had not been guilty of any vanity. He had not been guilty of adultery. He had been a considerate master. He had been benevolent and kind to everyone. He had been faithful to God. He had not committed any idolatry in worship of a moon or the sun. He had been kind toward other fellow human beings. And he says, if I have not done this, then may thorns grow in my land. So, what a beautiful summary of what a righteous person looks like, and or looked like, I should say, in Job's time. And I'm reminded of Jesus in Matthew 25. Same thing. I was hungry, you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. Enter into the kingdom. And I take the signs of in the New Testament of a follower of Christ is that he does these good things that Jesus talks about in Matthew 25. And so, again, not that works save anyone, but works show whether one has been saved or whether one has had a true conversion in New Testament salvation through Christ. So I would go to Matthew 25 to see a parallel passage describing what a righteous disciple of Jesus Christ should look like. And there's an interesting parallel, I think, between those two texts. Thank you and for letting me share this.